Welcome to Fitness and Consciousness. My guest today is Blake Bruning, a 2-stripe black belt under Marcelo Monteiro, and a Jeet Kune instructor, and a Kali instructor under Dion Ricardo, among many other things. We just finished up a good training session. He's been giving me lessons. So, thanks for doing the podcast, Blake. What got you into martial arts originally?
That's kind of I'll try to make it a short Reader's Digest version, but I would say a Bruce Lee movie when I was about 6 years old. Stayed up one late night, and after I saw that, just something changed, and I just always gravitated to martial arts, but I didn't even know you could take martial arts till I was 16, I didn't even know it was possible. I grew up in the old days where, like, Bloodsport was the #1 movie, so I thought you literally probably had to catch I'd have to steal a samurai sword and literally get caught by the father, and he adopts you to train his son. Like, I had no idea you could just walk in a martial art academy, so, otherwise I would have rushed there. But growing up until I got to be 16 and I found that out, I would ask my mom for stuff through years. I'd be like, I want a wooden sword, I want a bokken, or I want tabby boots, or give me a 3-sectional staff, or I want these nunchucks. And she kind of humored me. I grew up on a farm, so she was extremely humoring me from their background. And then I was having lunch with a friend, and he was a little short guy, kind of looked like a lead singer from Poison if he was overweight and a little smaller. And he's a guy that was a hardcore Street Fighter 2 player, and he got me into the game. And he's talking to me one day during lunch, after school lunch, or during school lunch, but off campus. He's like, so what are you doing tonight? And I'm like, I'm going to play Street Fighter. My job is to finally beat you at it, And he says, oh, I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm going to karate. I'm like, what do you mean you're going to karate? And then we had this catch-22 go on for a couple minutes until I finally understood. I'm like, so let me get this straight. You will give this guy money, and he will teach you martial arts. You don't have to get caught stealing a samurai sword. And he said, no, bro, you can just go do martial arts. I'm like, bro, you're taking me there today. So immediately, after school, I told my mom I'm going to hang out with a friend, and I just went to a martial art academy. And it started off at a local karate academy in Indianapolis. I think it wasn't Steve Anderson's, but it was like his subsidiary academy that was close off of Shadeland. It was a new starting one with a guy that was like a younger instructor. And, I think he lasted for a few years before they just kind of absorbed back into the main branch, which was only like a mile away to begin with. Didn't really space that one out very well. Anyways. And
when I met you, it was in probably like 95, 96.
Yeah, 96, 97.
Something like
maybe,
that. Yeah.
I graduated in 95. It was probably 96, man.
Okay, so
97,
you're
like that.
2 years older than me, and I remember you doing a lot of the stick fighting, the Kali, the trapping, and then later came to find out you were doing like the ground fighting, the Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. How did you get into the Brazilian Jiu Jitsu?
When after about 2 years of martial arts, doing a lot of different styles of martial arts, I spent like 6 months in karate. Then I did some light sparring with this kickboxer friend. I didn't know him. He was very good or anything, but he just would kick and punch, and he could do some pretty sweet jump kicks. But while I was trying to find a place in between that 6 months, I found a praying mantis at Dragon Kung Fu Academy. That guy started trying to find Wing Chun from another guy that moved into Indianapolis. This was like 20-some years ago. So it's like while he moved in there, he started taking Wing Chun, and then we finally had a Jeet Kune Do instructor come, and I want to say it was the summer 93 or 94. Maybe, I think it was the year 94 when he came. And so after that, that instructor came and kind of took me from my Kung Fu instructor, just kind of stole me straight up. And so back then was also when UFC 2 or 3 was in effect, UFC 1. So the same time I started learning my Jeet Kune Do, he was all about the UFC, although he didn't have what you'd call a good ground game. He had a lot of arm locks and other stuff, which is very predominant in the Filipino Kali. Like, they do have arm bars on the ground and different locks and leg holds and twists. It wasn't BJJ. So he kind of saw that aspect and was like, this stuff's coming up, now you can see in a fight, like, check this out. So he kind of tried to show us what he knew and the variations similar to what he saw, but he really wasn't a BJJ player. He's just a Filipino Kali. He's a great kickboxer, my old instructor. I'm not going to name names, really, unless you guys really want, but, this is my first JKD instructor, and I guess again, his name's Brady Edwabnik, but it's a long time ago. And anyways, he kind of got me looking at that stuff, but he covered some ground, but it was never BJJ. And then as he left and moved back to New York, and I was struggling on my own with Steve Gwynn to find training partners and teach. I would say, we knew of BJJ, but there was still no one around Indianapolis. There was just no BJJ. Around that same time we were looking for it, then we had to go out to like Jack McVicker in Terre Haute, Dan Ricardo in Chicago. We'd catch, if there are any BJJ players coming to the surrounding state area, like Dan Osano was BJJ, but Dan came, we'd see him. Vu came, we'd see him. Jack and Dion came, we'd see them. Roy Harris would come. Gustave Dantes, Andre Penares, Eric Pauls, anyone we'd see that, the names that would come in the area for the next several years, we'd go see a seminar and go get to see them. Spend a couple days in Chicago or Terre Haute or Richardson, or I think it's what they said. Either we'd go wherever we could, and then we'd see these guys and get what we could, but there still wasn't a black belt around. So while we were kind of pirating that, was around the same time Indianapolis, and I didn't know about them, but integrated fighting was getting known, and that was kind of where Chris Lytle came from, a bunch of other guys, but we didn't even know about them for like a long time. So we were still kind of doing our own thing, more in the Jeet Kune Do approach. And then as time went by, I was doing BJJ as far as to seminar work, and I got my blue belt under Dan Ricardo, and I was learning his system. But while I had a blue belt under him, and about 14, 15 years ago, however long Marcel's been in America, I found out about ring sports because I started hearing about Chris Lytle. This is before The Ultimate Fighter #4, when he was on the TV show. Because he came back when it wasn't the normal Ultimate Fighter. Ultimate Fighter 4 is where they had a lot of people that never got a title shot, but were Ultimate Fighters, and they brought them together. And so that's where Lytle started getting more press. But around that time is when I found out about ring sports, and then right before he went on there. It was like season 3 was finishing up. Lytle already went into film 4 before it aired, was around the time I showed up. And then that's where Marcelo was about to come. So I did some Muay Thai and boxing under Keith Palmer, Muay Thai under John Castle, and I couldn't really catch Chris. He was in and out just fighting, get ready to do fights, so he didn't really teach or anything. And around that time, about a month after I found these guys, Marcelo moved in, and then I started being a student of Marcelo's from there on out.
What about Marcelo's style made you stick with him?
Well, I studied a lot of martial arts, and BJJ is just one aspect. But as I took the accumulation of a lot of different people's requirements and techniques, because like every instructor you'd see them, and they'd give you about like 100 different moves, and there was always some variations on it. And every time I was studying a new guy and his stuff and trying to get through his system, I always had different problems. You always have problems with every system as you learn it. I mean, people just have their own problems. But when I started dealing with Marcelo's stuff, he would show these just little basic positional nuances that helped me solve all the problems I had with all this other material. And being who I was already at that point, with 12 years under my belt, I was already a full instructor in Jeet Kune Do. I've spent about 7 years loosely trying to find BJJ, even though I was only a blue belt. When I saw him, I knew what I was looking at. Like, I could tell that his game was what I would call the true game of BJJ. Not that there aren't variations of style, but he had the true understanding in the basics, because, again, it was solving all the positional detail and sweeps and other problems I had going on. It solved me so I could understand the game and not just be a guy that randomly has moves and trying to put the moves together. And, I mean, I fought really well at that point, good enough for the average guy around, but it's just... I couldn't see the game as well. I couldn't explain the game. And, like I said, all these little details were solving all the problems I had with other moves that would give me problems when I'd go for them.
Yeah, that was something that I noticed because I was learning traditional Japanese Jiu Jitsu. And so when I would watch Jiu Jitsu matches or the UFC, I mean, sometimes there would be something like a new move I hadn't seen, but most of the time I've seen all there is to see. I knew all the, shoulder locks with maybe you're using your legs or your arms or whatever, but there's just, then when I started training with you and I had one lesson at Marcelo's, it was different than other Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys that I trained with. It just seemed like every little thing that I did was a fatal mistake. There was just like, I put my hand 2 inches this way, take my back, choke, sweep. And so what sticks out to me is like the gripping and the moves in between the moves. So like, all right, passing guard to side control. Okay, well, they do that in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, and not that I'm the spokesperson for Brazil or Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, but it just seems like in the Brazilian system, there's more going on between A and B. So like between A and B, there's all this setting it up, and in between. So can you like? Does that make sense? Am I?
Yeah.
Can you like say like where does that come from? Like why are they the Brazilians at it so much better? So much even that in Japan they're accepting Brazilian Jiu Jitsu schools, and you have Japanese guys taking Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Which, for a while, to me, it didn't really seem to make sense. Because, like, this stuff isn't new. They didn't invent the triangle choke. It's been around since the samurai days, at least.
Yeah, there's not really too much new under the sun. So how can this be, right? Yeah. Well, first of all, before you get deeper, I'm just going to make a side note. I just want to say that what I'm about to say, like, when I say things, I'm not your best vernacular instructor. Like, I may forget people's names a little bit, or I may not get the dates right. So when I say things, just realize I'm kind of putting a glossy tone to get my point across, and there is some validity behind when I tell stories, but just know that I might have my dates wrong, or a little bit of name wrong, or some fact wrong in pronunciation. So, bear with me in that. But what I would say is that BJJ, first of all, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu started with judo. All right, this is my generic story on it from what I understand from different instructors and 2 years trying to piece it together. Please feel free, you guys out there with the keyboard. You want to correct me, have fun, correct me all the way. I don't mind. I'm not conceited. I'm not saying I'm pompous or I know everything. I'm just saying from what I got the general understanding through all my years of training is kind of this. So about 300 or 400 years ago, when the shogunate era was ending because rifles were brought into Japan, now they have guns. Now they realize that a lot of these martial arts is going to be futile to spend a lot of time training people to do traditional martial arts when a bullet takes less training and can kill a guy with superior skills. So that took swords from being a national importance in Japan. As they started having more guns, it ended the shogunate era. They were no longer relying on samurai, and ninja wasn't a big deal as much, and other things. I mean, sure, they have their own wet works operations and ninja and stuff, but it wasn't the same. So when that happened, they realized now it's a gun world. They realized that some of their traditional martial arts is going to go extinct. It's inevitable that now it becomes more of a pastime and more of a recreational, exciting activity more than actual functionality to survive now in a wartime situation. I mean, I got planes, you got guns. I mean, military still do hand to hand, but in any world or any country, but it's the hand to hand isn't that in detail. It's not needed, So with that happening, I believe Japan eventually kind of had this big competition, from what I understand. And to this competition about 400 years ago, I may be wrong. I don't think it's 2, but it might be. But this is somewhere around there. Like I said, I'm a little off on days. But they had this big competition where the judo came, jiu-jitsu came, a lot of these martial arts came. I don't know what all came, but I'm sure they had karate, Okinawan, karate, other thing. Like all these they had some of the best people that decided to come or got nominated or got chosen or decided to come. They had a competition with the best in the arts, and then they had a big battle royale, so to speak. Everybody took turns fighting. And at the end of the day, the judo guy is the guy that won. And I believe that they had a judo match with the jiu-jitsu guy. So about 400 years ago, the judo guy beat the jiu-jitsu guy. And my guess, from just my own understanding, would probably be that what happened was being the judo, being more of the stand-up and the takedown and the thrower, and the jiu-jitsu guy, which probably might have been nothing but a purist back then. It might have been just pure ground fighting. I mean, they do that with sword fighting. You got Aikido, Aido, and Kendo. Aido is sword drawing, Kendo is sword fighting. Aikido is more about when the swords clash and now you're in risk range. So it's like, even though it's a sword art, they even break those down individually. So I'm sure the jiu-jitsu might have been a purist on jiu-jitsu. I doubt they spent a lot of time takedowns. So the judo guy probably easily got to his domain first, took the guy down, got on top. He won the match enough. Judo becomes the national pastime of Japan, like baseball used to be in America, and jiu-jitsu died.
I believe it was Kano's judo that won, like late 1800s, something.
Yeah, it's like 200 years ago, yeah. So with Kano doing that, jiu-jitsu died. So 200 years ago, there was no more jiu-jitsu. There may be, I hear a lot of people talk about Japanese jiu-jitsu, and I think there probably is an underground movement. Like, there are still samurai today that are trained from their father to their son. And I've met one before. His name, like a guy in Paul Vunak organization called Makoto. And it's like, there still are people that, I'm sure there still is some hidden jiu-jitsu guy out there. I may be wrong, but I'm sure there's still some father that taught his son, and it's still somewhere, but I don't know anywhere where it's surfaced in the world. You have people doing what they call small circle jiu-jitsu. Some people call it Japanese jiu-jitsu, but whatever the true art that was jiu-jitsu is gone. It's disappeared. It's either dead or it's in a larval state, hidden with just a couple people. Yeah. And then that'll be tested when that time ever comes, ever does. But that's just my opinion on that. So with this, jiu-jitsu died, and so judo took over. And so with judo's history now, judo is the main art. judo tried about 100 years ago or so. The guy in charge decided to send out people out into the world and popularize judo. So what happened with judo was he sent 4 guys out. The one that ended up in Brazil, Media. He was the guy known as the father of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he started in America. He ended in Brazil, but after going to Brazil, he started changing a lot of what he did. I think he started taking away moves, adding more moves. He started to change the game and make it more on the ground fight, which really wasn't as prevalent. And so with him being away, with him being out of the country, with him being in a new country, a world never going back, and other things that happened to him in his quest, he started to grow the art and change the art and develop the art. So jiu-jitsu started to finally come around again a little bit more, as opposed to the predominant judo, which is a lot about winning from the top, taking them down, and superiorly dominating them on the way to the ground. I mean, they don't really have a lot of ground fighting in a lot of the judo because they expect you threw them, they're down, you've got their arm, you've got their face, you've got something. So there is no battle once I throw you, which is kind of some of the overall mentality. So
their head might be busted open.
You
don't need to worry about
shoulder dislocated, arm broken, neck snap, So with that, the jiu-jitsu started to grow, and then over the next decades, as it grew and people in Brazil started getting it and things started growing, when Gracie started finally coming out in America, we finally found out about Hoist, but Hickson was already one of the front runners of Hickson is Helio's grandson, is how it goes, either way. So Hickson did a lot of it, but they sent Hoist to America because they thought it'd be just more impressive to have Hoist win than Hickson. Because they'd be like, of course Hickson wins. He's the specimen. It's like, well, we'll give you Hoist. He's one of the littler brothers, and he'll still hold his own. And so that's when we found out about what they're doing. And that's where it kind of had a culture shock. And the main reason BJJ probably won is I don't want to take slack for this, but if you watch Hoist's guard, it really wasn't the best guard game. It's like when he triangles, he pulls on a foot, not the shin. But because they did more guard and no one else did guard, what really won out, I would say, was not Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. What I think won out was the fact that no one knew guard, and it was a big hole in everyone's arsenal. And I would say guard won out more than the fact that Hoist Gracie was great at guard. I think guard won out more than just BJJ overall. It was the fact that guard was what no one knew what to do with. And so there was just everyone, even though if they're big and tough, they're a rookie. And I would say, though, that if you are to study BJJ, you'll start to understand that, in life, to get good at something, the main thing is to make the main thing the main thing. And when it comes to BJJ, if you wanted to get a college degree in BJJ, then you have to be a major in guard. Guard is the main thing. And the way a BJJ person looks at it is the whole fight is about guard. So if you pass my guard, it's over for me. Or if I sweep you from guard, I'm now on top, it's over for you. So to them, that is the main war. They do a lot of starting in guard, in a closed guard, not in you sit there with your knee up and scoot in on somebody on their knees. A lot of it does start and revolve around guard. Everything else is important. They teach it, but it all comes from the view, just like the judo guy, maybe. It's like, well, if I took you down, it's over. So then it's like, if I beat you from the guard, it's over. We'll reset more. Not that they don't keep fighting and choke out and get backs and the unbelly, other things. It's just guard is the main thing. Without guard, you're not doing BJJ, I would say.
Yeah, I think that was, even though at the Japanese school we did guard, but the teacher didn't really like closed guard. And in a way, it kind of made sense. Like nowadays in the UFC, you don't see a lot of closed guard submissions. And to me, it was like if you're on your back, you can do more submissions if you open up the guard and start working from there. But now, even after starting to train 20 years ago or whatever it is, like just seeing like why start from guard, and like in competition you might see somebody like pull guard, which is probably not the best street tactic, but just like why start in guard. And now I'm starting to kind of to see like it's just like where you get in. You get in your car, you buckle the seatbelt. That's where you start. So then, like, you drive down the road, you're turning left, you're turning right, you're hitting the brakes, you're hitting the gas.
We got to do whatever we get to town, but we're starting from our driveway every time.
Yeah, you're starting from there, and then if there's a scramble and you know how to get back to guard, then you're controlling their hips, you're controlling their posture, hopefully, and so even after training for a long time and seeing so much of it, just looking at it from this slightly different point of view is really eye-opening. And then that's how I'm like teaching my other buddies. I don't, present myself as like a jiu-jitsu teacher, but I do train some people, and so it's trying to do this system the new way. Like, and my buddy, like, we joke around, he's like, "You're starting from guard? You have your closed guard?" He's like, "Oh my God, your guard is closed." Like, he doesn't even know, he's just joking. Of course, he's worked that stuff before, but just kind of like, because before it was like, well, if you have your closed guard and then you want to do something, what are you going to do? Open the guard. So why open the guard? Your friend might want to beat me up too, so I'll get my feet in your hips, push your hips away, then I can stand up. Or
the closed guard thing definitely is like Marcel would always say this. He'd say, like, closed guard is a baby's blanket. He's like, you need to know closed guard, you know how to beat closed guard, you need to know the grip fight, you need to know how to fight the person with the grips, you need to be the guy on top trying to figure out the right grips while you're fighting the guy trying to stop it. I mean, you need to know how to break open a good guard, because there are a lot of guys who play closed guard. But he says it's like a baby's blanket. As you get better at closed guard and you're fighting better opponents, it's going to be really hard to win from closed guard. We got to progress the fight. But the funny thing is, in the Brazilian world, is that a lot of these older school people that never came around to a lot of the older school trained black belts, they actually have next to no open guard, which is interesting. Almost all their stuff is fully focused closed guard. All right, and why you would want to start from open guard or not want to start from open guard? I mean, we'll do this, we'll play like this, but the problem with starting from open guard is like, well, where do we start from open guard? Do we start where you're already halfway past my guard, you're sitting up, your hands are in the air? I mean, do we start where I have a full open guard and I have your sleeves? Do I get to start from the spy guard? So it's like, to just say we start from open guard, even though a lot of times, like I said, I've had this story with Ryan, but I'm like, you see people on their knees, one guy's on his knees, the other guy sits on his butt, he sits like he's trying to do a butterfly sweep, he's 3 feet away, and he says, let's spar, they shake hands, and he scoots forward to just put you into this little butterfly sweep. And I'm like, why would you ever start from there? Why would you be either of those guys? But it's like, so that's almost about what it'd be if we just started any random open guard. It's like, well, how do we agree to start? Where do we start? It's like the closed guard has to be the starting position, and then we usually high five and he touches my arms like a protection, not a ground and pound situation, but where they grab the arms, and that's where we start. That way it's an even kill. The moment you touch my arms, you're going to break my guard. The moment you touch my arms, I'm going to attack you. And then it also starts from that closed position. I mean, I can open my guard instantly from there if I want, just open my feet and you do whatever, but it's like you want to observe that closed guard fight. And to answer your question earlier, which we didn't get to finish, sorry about that, but so with the BJJ coming back, and it changed, and like I said, judo is traditional, so to be under this judo guy, which he was, and he had been really good to be taken away, he knew what was needed for every step, every stripe, and everything. He started to change the game, so he stops being a judo player and a technician from a traditional system the moment he starts changing the game. Like, he kind of, I don't know if his instructor would have been proud or would have wanted to disown Media for what he did. I think he would have been proud, but he could have easily have been mad at Media and hated him and said, you're a illegal judoka. It's like, you have broken the laws. So I don't know what would have happened. And then plus they never probably heard from each other again unless one of them actually sent a letter. I mean, we're talking, about 100 years ago where boat travel is the best way to get back to Japan and letters, So, but with this, as years went by and BJJ came back out with hoist and it took over, Japan started recognizing the same thing. It's like, there's not a lot of guard. We need to know this guard. And when they started doing the pride, and, Hickson definitely took authority over there with, was it Takada? He took authority over that. They, as being Japanese as they are, it's like they'll fight their best, but if they lose, they'll give honor to those who lost, and they'll be like, now, how did you beat us? Because I'm going to find that out, and we're going to make it better, and we're going to come back to your house with what you've taught us trained. So, with that, they recognize that it is no longer of the judo. It is no way it can be jiu-jitsu. So they had to now recognize it as Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and that's why you see guys in Japan teaching Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, because it's not really judo anymore, and it's not the Japanese. So they will honor it by calling it Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Sorry, so that closes that up. But that also kind of explains the guard. And like I said, the guard, I think, is what definitely made them have to eye open, because everybody has a side control or lay across sides. Everybody has a mount or get their back and choke. Like you said, there's triangles from different positions. Everyone's at least had one leg caught in a half guard, even if they don't understand the game. I mean, you're right. All these positions, there's nothing really new under the sun. But I would definitely say that, BJJ was the firstest, thus the mostest, the firstest with the mostest, thus the bestest, because of guard. And that had to be reckoned with. It's like, imagine doing boxing and wrestling, but you never get a kick. Kicking would change the game. Imagine you did kickboxing and wrestling, but you had no clinch work. You can't work knees, headbutts, elbows, no clinch work whatsoever. It's like that would change the game. So as UFC was forming the same way, and they had to figure out what can we leave in, what can we take out, how can we make sure people aren't just going to be destroyed after a fight, how can we grow the sport? As thing goes by, little things like that do change a game. And so guard had to be recognized as much as a clinch had to be recognized. Clinch ends a fight in boxing, but not other arts. So, I think there was no way they could hide anymore. They found a big missing piece. And because that contribution, BJJ will never be pulled away. It'll always be known as the father or mother of guard, modern day guard.
Yeah. And I think part of it also is, like, before Japan was unified and they had the competition to see whose style was the best, and Kano won, and before that everything was a secret, because you have like these warring clans where you might do jiu-jitsu and I do jiu-jitsu, but it's a big secret what we're doing, because we might have to fight and I need to surprise you.
Yeah, back when martial arts was really to help you kill or stay alive, not just win points and be a sport as a primary form of fighting. And
then so the Gracies, they learn, they're like, okay, well, we'll fight anybody in the world. No rules. You just come and get it. They didn't win every time, but they won a lot. And like Hoist is why I got into jiu-jitsu.
For America, he'll always be known as the jiu-jitsu guy. He really wasn't in the family the guy, but he'll always be known. Americans always hold Hoist like Babe Ruth.
Yeah, they don't even
he was the jiu-jitsu guy.
Yeah, they don't even argue that Hickson was the man. Yeah. So like my dad was reading, as he knew I was training with, some buddies that like Josh and Jeremiah and all those guys, and Izzy, and then my dad's like reading about this Hoist Gracie guy, and he's like, he's beating up all these bigger, stronger guys. You should take jiu-jitsu. And then I found my jiu-jitsu teacher, and it just blew my mind. And guys that I was training with for months or whatever before, like, I remember after my first day, I drove straight to my buddy's house, like, check this out. And I'm showing the triangle chokes and all this stuff, and it was like, no, I'm the teacher. After just like a couple days, I'm like, look at this stuff. This is
I only taught for one reason originally, and I knew I was suited to teach eventually, and I have an anointing from Christ to be a teacher. It's just what my fruit is, but my fruit of my spirit, I guess. But yeah, it's like we had a grassroots 24 years ago. No one was doing it. So like even integrated, even though they had their own group, they were just trying to figure it out. They'd bring in people from Thailand to show them stuff. They'd bring in people from here. It's like, no one did do it. So it's like I had to teach, so I had training partners, because there was no school I could go to that was doing everything I wanted. So I literally taught for free, like all of us do. We teach for free to get students just so we can learn our stuff. And then as time goes by, you either shed it off and you get your skill, or unfortunately I had to keep teaching. I couldn't break away from it.
Yeah, that's what I was doing too, because like a lot of my buddies, they wanted to learn. Maybe they wrestled or they did something, so that I'd train with them and I'm teaching them. And they start out as a student, and then they're a good training partner, and then maybe they're choking me out. Maybe they're after time. So
yeah, Roy Harris once told me, and I love this. He's like, my goal as a teacher is for you to finally get me, for you to finally choke me out, you to finally catch me on bar. Now my goal is to see how quick I can get you good enough to beat me. And I always love that teaching maxim he gave. It's like, it's the goal. The goal isn't for you to know my art, so I can always win. My goal, if I'm a true teacher, is to get you to finally beat me as fast as you can, so we can get even better.
Yeah, it's with the Gracie challenge, and now that there's no more like ancient secrets. It's all out. Like one school might not want you going showing all their tricks, these competitors and stuff. But once you get into the competitions, like, oh, this guy keeps doing this. He has this different way of doing leg locks or whatever, and then they want to like beat that, and then it just evolves more and more over time. So I think like with the traditional systems, they quit evolving. So if you're going to like do the traditional Japanese class, I learned a lot from it. I have a lot of respect for it. but then there's a point like where it stops evolving. You might have like different students, like the guy that's 5'8" and 280 is probably going to have a different style than the guy that's 6'4" and 180. But like having just these competitions and like answers that weren't there before, and then those answers being bested, and then it's getting more and more evolved. Fast.
I always call that being kennel blind. It's a phrase I picked up from a dog breeder. Like some people, not saying you, just people, like the biggest one of a lot of people is they only go to their one dojo, and so they end up fighting a lot of people that, even though we're all different or they have different moves, they're all still working from the same repertoire.
Yeah.
And so even though they do it a little differently, they tweak it, they have different combinations, they have different ways to like to start or finish, they have different strong suits. You still get caught in the fact that you're still fighting the same kennel all the time. And I call it kennel blind. You start thinking you're so good or you're great at this, and you are. Like with these guys that most people can't handle, you handle well. But the thing is, when you do go to a competition or you start cross-training, people don't always move the same way, and that can cause you to kind of freeze or hesitate. And you can get caught off guard a little bit here and there. So most people that do compete, they'll, especially in BJJ, they actually do a lot of cross training. They're not just talking about going to brother or sister academies, but when they can, they'll train with other different black belts when they're at a black belt level. Find different organizations where they can go into special black belt workshops, or even just going to different cities to compete. You at least find new people to train with. But yeah, cross training is huge. If you're going to be a competitor in any form of high level in the world on anything, you've got, like if you're a musician, you've got to hear other people playing classical music. If you're competing for classical, you need to hear other people play Brahms, other people play Strauss. I mean, you need to, you have to see that there's other ways to do it. And, it's very easy to be caught in your own little world beating up your cousin, And I tell people, like, if all you do is fight your cousin, at the end of the day, you're really great at beating up your cousin, but you're not good at beating up anyone else yet. Now, you probably have the potential if you've been training, but because you're not used to different people that move and react and do things differently, your reaction time hasn't been trained to beat them up as easy as your cousin. But, so cross-training's huge,
Yeah, we've talked before about the rabbit holes, like Marcelo's...
Rabbit trails, I call them.
Yeah, rabbit trails, yeah. So Marcelo's style, it's like, you're saying avoids a lot of these things. Like you can say, like you could look up, Mantis Kung Fu. And here's this move, and here's the counter to that move, and here's the counter to that counter. And or you don't even have to worry about learning Mantis Kung Fu. You just do this. But there's, even in the Jiu Jitsu world, there seems to be a lot of things that people can avoid. What do you think makes Marcelo's style good at avoiding these other rabbit trails?
Yeah, he's alluding to when I told him that a lot of what makes Marcelo. We'll say this: what separates the best from the rest. I didn't call Marcelo the best. He won't call himself the best either. I mean, he's up there with the people that fight at the highest level, but there is no best. First of all, there's no best at BJJ.
Yeah.
There's no best at any sport. But the best, all right, when you learn the best, the littlest details make the biggest difference sometimes. The littlest details have the hugest advantage. So learning these little details can change the game. And so what I call rabbit trails, and why, well, first of all, I'm the one that says Marcelo's game is what I believe the right game. So Ryan, just to clarify, Ryan's not saying that. He's alluding to when I said that I believe he has the right game, and I would show why. But there are little things that were always going to be important in BJJ, like whenever you're in guard and you break guard, regardless, you want to talk guard breaking theory, the moment the guard opens, you need your knee up. Marcel calls it apply the knee up. And so like that alone, like that one concept, that whenever the guard opens, you need to put your knee up. Well, if you just break guard and now go for a pass, and your knee's not up to, first off, they can just pull guard a lot. So if you guys are always getting your guard broken, or breaking a guard, and then they immediately close guard, and every time you break it, they just keep closing it. Odds are the thing is you don't know yet, which you might not have been taught, is the moment the guard breaks, I step up with my right foot to get my right knee in between me and his leg, so there's no way he can close it. There's more to it than that. But like that alone is a technical importance, and it becomes a concept, because if you use that technique every time, it now changes the game. Because if you rely on a lot of guard moves that have never experienced a knee up, well, the knee up's going to take away a lot of this rabbit trails or basic generic BJJ off the chart that doesn't involve that knee up. Because that knee up is the most important thing at the moment. So if you've never trained with that knee up,
Not that you don't have good moves, but you need to see that once you see that knee is supposed to come up, it affects the game. Now this is where I usually start talking about rabbit trails. So say he doesn't get his knee up. So now you say, well, since he's not doing the main game or he's not sticking to the right script, which wins, well, what could he do? And so now they start playing what I call martial art theory. Like, well, since he's, without saying this, it's kind of in quotes, it's like, since he's not getting his knee up, wink, wink, we're going to go for this, and we're going to go for that. And if I do this, he counters with that. If he counters with that, I counter with this. But the problem is, if he got his knee up, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. These techniques wouldn't even been able to be applied, and thus is why I call it a rabbit trail. Like, it only works most part in theory if the other opponent is not doing the right things. Just like when you're getting past guard. Side control is all about the posture. Like most anything in martial arts and BJJ, base is more important than posture. Without base, you fall over. So you got to have base and you got to have posture. All base and posture do one of two things: keep you positionally safe and submissionally safe as you root through positions. So all these bases or postures are very, very important. And when you don't have the right bases and posture and you understand them, the right base and posture should beat it every time, like the knee up. And so base comes before posture, except in side control. In side control, say I have a good side control and I want to move through side control. If I twist my base without securing my posture, he can escape. Side control is the only exception. I got to have posture before moving base. And that's some crazy theories, but there are little concepts like that I'll pull up from Marcelo, which helps solve the game and how you're looking about it. Just like it's all about the underhook. That's one of my generic phrases. It's all about the underhook. And then as you start understanding that more, you see it pop up more. I'd have to actually give you exact techniques and you guys could see me instead of just hear me to explain it. But like when you don't observe these basic understanding and rules and principles that need to be played, that's where you definitely get heavy and ridden with rabbit trails. What if, what if, what if? Here's 18 variations of this one sweep. But this one sweep is inherently wrong because it doesn't respect a guy that knows how to get his knee up.
Yeah, putting the knee up was something that I was not used to doing. And then when I started working with you and just putting the knee up, trying to do a triangle, it's not going to happen. So if you're in my guard and you start passing it, usually like people start to make an opening, then you can shoot up your triangle. But once that knee is up, that knee is trapping the same side leg. So you can't throw the triangle up. It's also protecting the arm. You can't do the arm drag. Your arm lock is gone. The other leg is, so that's one thing that when I was working with my other people that I train with, it's like, this is how we're going to do it. Get used to this, and even though I don't understand it fully by any means, like, we're going to start working this way because it makes sense and it shuts down so much of the game.
And that was like one of those things where I said when I saw his little details, like that knee up changed it for me. It's like I noticed that I was passing guard, I had different guard passes. I did learn some guards where I did get my knee up, but no one ever told me out of all these guys ever said, when the guard breaks, you always need to get your knee up. I mean, there's some exceptions. I mean, you can break guard, slam a leg down and go to half guard. You can try to do some other guard breaks to go into stuff. But no matter what, it's like no one ever told me your knee needs to come up every time. Like, you have to do that. And when I teach kids, I explain it like it's a video game because they're kids, and these teenagers play video games. So I'll be like, you ever play a video game? Like, yeah. I said, you ever save your progress? Of course. What happens if you don't save your progress? So I'm like, so when you break that guard and you worked hard to make grips and break it, you get your knee up, and that saves your progress, so you at least won't regress the guard. You may not win, you may not get a clean pass, you may have problems fighting, but you at least aren't going to get regarded. And so if that's just one point, and then we can hit these other points of light till we get through the guard, it kind of sets up what I have termed as the never-ending guard. That's my own name for what I think Marcelo and BJJ is all about, is trying to create a never-ending guard. That's my own name for it. I kind of TM'd it. So the one-way station is start from close, and then you want to end on mount or side control. Like, it's not just A to B. It's more like A to F. And in the process, you got A, B, C, D, E, F. You got to recognize all these points before you finally get side control. And you're right, a lot of these other systems, it's A, we're in guard, B, we're in side control. And they may have a C, they may make C in, but there's not A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and they don't see the map and all the main roads and the back roads, but they're good roads. They're not rabbit trail roads that are saying we can only do this if my opponent's not up to the challenge or up to good moves.
Yeah, it's a really good system, and and I would recommend, I don't get any kind of commission for it or anything, but Marcelo's white to blue DVD set and I'm on the third one, and it's really put together well. Other ones that I've watched, like, okay, it's an hour long, there's this move, and then there's this move, and then there's this move, and it's okay. Especially if like you're just looking to like add more moves to the moves you're already doing. But going through this Marcelo DVD, and especially after like being able to put it into context after working with you, it's like he really puts it together in a good way. Bottom game, top game, back, and several techniques in each section. So it's a really good DVD if you're wanting to understand this system better. Maybe he doesn't have a school in your area.
That's definitely. If you want to check it out, go to bjjcoach.com. That's Marcelo's site. It's BJJ, like Brazilian Jiu Jitsu Coach.com. But yeah, he has an online curriculum. He has a DVD curriculum. And I talked to Marcel before. I'm like, hey, who's the best, Marcel? And like I said, he'll even say there is no best. And Marcel always said this. He says, what I'm best at. He's a good fighter. Don't get me wrong, people. Like Marcelo is a world champion who's taught lots of world champions. But he just says that, who he's taught to make world champions. But he said that what I was best at was recognizing and arranging curriculums. And you can see that is definitely a strong suit. When you watch the DVD, you can understand how his game is shaped based on curriculums and a curriculum-based system of functionality. And he kind of has it already organized to an extent. You need to be learning this at this level, and you need to be learning that at that level. He never does have a paint-by-number system, though. Like, you learn the DVDs, you train with someone he knows, but he doesn't have a paint-by-number system. Even if you watch the DVDs, it's not necessarily a paint-by-number. You need lesson 1 than lesson 2. But he'll have a good group of stuff that you should be learning at Stripe 1, however you want, but you need to kind of be on these. Stripe 2 will kind of build off of it, but Stripe 2 is still the foundation. Then it just kind of keeps going like that. Some will help the foundation. By the time you get to blue to purple, most of the foundation is established. The rest is the game versus the game, and then you got some of the higher belt stuff you can get. But it is very well structured that in each stripe level you kind of have the moves you want to work on, because it does is kind of like a prequel for your more advanced stuff. And Marcelo once said this, and I find it true through the years. He says, the way I train you guys is you have a harder time as white belts. He says you have a harder time as blue belts in the competition. He says the way I train you, it's harder for you. Yeah. But he says, but the thing is, it's because the way I train you. And he says, and then once you start getting to purple and brown belts, you're going to be looking slick and you're going to start winning. Because he kind of has it set up to where he's planning on you being a brown belt and a black belt. He's not planning on you to be a white belt and a blue belt. So a part of the way he even teaches it, it can seem a little less effective. Not the visual techniques and stuff, but as far as overall competition, sometimes, the white belts will be a little more frustrated. But the thing is, they don't know what they're getting. And then after you have a season of your life, and finally, as you're starting to see a lot of these weight stations I've been showing, they're all starting to collect and connect. Like as they start to hit blue, it just magically kind of the spider web just comes together for them, and then they really start exploding. And it's very interesting on just not only his method, but the way he teaches kind of causes all that mesh to happen in a beautiful way.
Yeah, it's really an impressive system. And after watching thousands and thousands of fights from UFCs and Prides and Jiu-Jitsu matches, it's like I'm kind of surprised that I'm surprised.
Yeah.
Because I've done this stuff quite a bit, and it still seems so new. Just like my hand crosses over too much, and then I'm beating just a couple moves.
I think
really
it comes.
Cool.
I think it comes to what you said earlier. It's like to everyone, there's nothing new under the sun. I mean, we all have been in guard. We all have been in side control. We all know what it's like to grab a head or knee the face, or we all know what it's like to punch our way into the punches and bunches. Things. I mean, it's like we all see it. So I think there's a lot of that too, where everybody just sees it's white noise and it's not their way. So unless they've been beat by it. And then they play that guy over and over again to realize it's constantly beating them, or somebody was there to show it with them and they were receptive. Yeah, you can easily, just like, why didn't I see it for years? It's just like I saw it come up, but I was never told that. So I never noticed the real benefit of a knee up. I just knew, well, you can get your knee up, So, it's just like, it's that's definitely what a revelation is. Always seen, but never perceiving. You've seen it the whole time, but you never noticed it. Now that you noticed it, you can't help notice it, and you can't help see that white elephant standing in the room now. It's like, before it was there, you just never paid attention, and now it's so blatantly in your face, this white elephant. It's like, how come that white elephant's been there this whole time and I never noticed? There's this gigantic elephant in my martial art game. It's like, how did I know that? Why wasn't it shown?
Yeah, it's exciting, and as long as you have an open mind, then it's good, and you're like, oh man, I wasted 20 years. It's not like that. It's because
Yeah.
you might show it to somebody else and they're brand new and they're like, yeah, I'm going to go to the Kung Fu school instead. It seems a lot more fun. I think it's better. They won't know. You can't convince them. They just have to, after a while, like you train for a long time, then you're like, oh wow, this dude's different. And so is there a striking system that's like a parallel to that? Like you were doing all this other stuff before and then...
Well, what got me into BJJ was that I'm a protectionist foremost. Let's just say I originally was a protectionist. So martial arts to me, the whole point of martial arts had one goal, and I needed to basically know what tools or techniques were the best to just protect my life or just to make sure I was safe and I could just survive. Not win with a cool submission, but just what I need to do to survive in case I got attacked. Like that was the whole goal of martial arts. To me, what was the point of martial arts if it wasn't, to me, to protect myself and be better at fighting? And I don't mean sport fighting. I just mean all-out protection. I mean, the guy could pick up a knife and stab me or hit me with a chair, gouge my eyes out. It's like, so everything was focused on that. And in the process of searching totality and freedom through, the JKD mindset, a lot of our guys that were already ahead of us in this path, and some of the more bigger names, they're already doing BJJ at this point because we're still talking a little bit after. Jeet Kune Do was the first to embrace BJJ, and I'll say that gladly. There are some people that embraced BJJ, but generally a lot of the major Jeet Kune Do players in the Midwest, anyways, or BJJ players were Jeet Kune Do schools that took in BJJ first, and there were Jeet Kune Do schools that did BJJ as well. But over time, they became BJJ schools that just teach Jeet Kune Do on the side because America wants BJJ more than it ever wanted Jeet Kune Do. And so, where we at with that question? Sorry, I kind of lost track. I kind of went on a tangent right there.
Is there a striking system that you thought of as effective as the grappling system?
All right. So thank you, Brian. So on this search, I get in tangents, people. Sorry. So on this search for protection on all forms, we knew BJJ was a major thing. We knew that, we got to know what to do on our ground. Okay, so ground had to be huge. And now our goal wasn't to wrestle on the ground. Our goal was to make sure if we got dragged to the ground or forced to the ground or fall on the ground, to learn how to get up within 3 seconds. Even if this guy's trying to punch me or claw my eyes out, I got to learn to get up because there's other people. So BJJ became kind of known as the most important to learn on the ground because of guard and because of stuff, and just because it was also new and it was taking over the world. So we all had a lot of the guys serious about protection had to become BJJ players. And my goal was never black belt; it was always purple belt. Roy Harris once told me, he's like, Blake, or it's like, you guys, we're going to teach you how to circumvent the ground and get up. But if you're serious about being a teacher, you're serious about being a protectionist, you would want at least a purple belt in BJJ for what that gives you. The timing, the reaction, instantly recognized position. When you're falling to the ground, you'll be able to make that one shift that makes it a whole lot better when you hit the ground. And he says, all those are just fuel to help your protection out. So black belt was never my original goal. It was really just purple belt. And so most BJJ places don't really teach the stand-up. I know Hickson and the other guys will swear that there was a lot more stand-up than there was with the judo roots. They did a lot more stand-up. They did a lot more headlock defense. Maybe a generic stab or a bash with a stick, a baseball bat at you.
Yeah.
They would, but most of their BJJ still, they might add some elbows or some palms when they would block and hit, but then they would go back into the judo and then they would take you down and break your arm, which was even still fascinating that even though this is, BJJ has now become more of a sport art, although they say it's like a lot of martial arts, although it was rooted in protection. But so some of them say you should start with protection. Some of them don't even teach the protection. Some say it was and they will, but they don't. It's not, but I would say modern day BJJ doesn't really have a huge protection base. Don't get me wrong. Don't get mad. I'm not trying to insult you. I'm just saying if you had 3 people attacking you right now, it'd be really hard to try to out armbar all 3 of those guys at once or in a row within 5 seconds, get the first 2 broken arm to handle one dude. It's going to be a lot harder if you're limited to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu alone. Now, I know they have more moves, but considering a lot of it still involves getting them to the ground or breaking their arm, you can only break 3 people's arms so fast when you got 6 punches punching you at the face on the stand.
Yeah, it's better off being a boxer.
You need more. You need more understanding, more training, more techniques. No one art is going to save you right there. You need understanding of multiple arts and multiple ranges. It's just not in their skill set, And so there's not a lot of strikes, and Marcelo doesn't teach any of the striking stand-up. Now, His ground game, though, I will tell you, when you start learning what I call the matrix of his foundation, it will circumvent about 90% of all punches and strikes on the ground. So if you understand his basic positions, his basic posturing, his basic plays, and what I call is the fundamental right game of BJJ, there is very few moments where I can actually get striked at as far as on the ground. So a lot of the stand-up, and Hoist kind of had, this is how Hoist got by in the UFC. Hoist would do this thing where he kind of took Bruce Lee's jeet tech, or is it jut tech with the feet, A
little stomp to the knee.
Yeah, he's not even, that's the thing. He's not even trying to stomp the knee. He's coming in straight, if you guys remember it, with his foot and kick. There's no way to do any power. What he's doing is he's coming in with forward pressure, and he's coming in forward, maintaining the space of center line in between of you guys as he comes forward, so any attack would at least be meet or pushed or touched, so he would never get hit with full contact as he came in close enough to bridge the gap to grab you. So that was the real brilliance between that punch foot hop in. It was not a strike. It was just to make sure that anything that did come in, he'd tag it a little bit if he did time it wrong to where he would get hit, so he wouldn't get really hit. And then he would lock up, he'd hug. They can't really hit or kick him anymore. And then that's where his game would come alive. And that's what really got the BJJ to take over America in UFC, was a circumvent to get to the ground, and then everyone was helpless. Chemo did a good job on him, and Grace should have finished. In retrospect, I could have finished that fight 10 times easier nowadays. But other than that, it's like it worked with everyone else. He just had to get in, take him down. He was all right.
Yeah. Yeah, adding the strikes adds a whole different thing. Like, it's easy to do jiu-jitsu and stuff.
But most of these BJJ guys, I wouldn't call it dirty boxing, but most of these BJJ guys, like even Marcel, he come here with his own hand game, and he would do to circumvent the stand-up, even the striking. He even strike too. Marcel, he always impressed me when he did MMA, because he being a straight BJJ guy, it isn't all they did. So like, he talked about one of his fights, and I'm like, well, how'd you get in there? He says, bro, man, he's expecting me to shoot in. I'm a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu guy. So what I feinted a shot, and I came up and hooked him in the face. I came around with some punches, and then when we locked up, I went down, and I put him in the monster raw control, and I broke his arm because he didn't tap, and he stood up. But he's like, I know what he's going to think. So he's like, man, of course I feinted a shot. He left open for me to strike, so it's like he has no problem striking. He's trained strike. Most of these guys that do MMA, they've trained some form of striking. Boxing, hardcore boxing that is blitzing towards you, if not doing kickboxing. Things like that. So there's an aspect, but I wouldn't say he teaches that at all in the curriculum, and it's not really in the school. It's much more towards the modern day and evolution of BJJ, which is a sport art primarily. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite striking art that you think is most effective for like when we were doing like boxing, and I'm blocking your hook with my glove, and then I was like, well, what if I don't have a glove? I don't want to do that, right? And then you're just like, okay, take the gloves off, and it's just like a whole different world of, you're not going to do that. You're going to do this. So
gear versus no gear,
Like, so instead, so we have like the sport of boxing. You can play with your friends, and you can get good, and it teaches you distance and all that. But then, like, when I asked, well, what about this block? I have this giant glove on. Take that off. So what striking method do you think is good for, or like optimal for the street protection situation?
Well, it's kind of a loaded question. It's kind of hard to answer too. I would definitely say that when you look at martial arts, I look at it like this. You have two types of martial arts. You have protection-based martial arts, and you have what I call sport-based martial arts, or sport/perfection. So we got protection versus perfection, or also known as sport. So no matter what technique you learn, it's either something you can use in a sport or a technique you can't use in a sport. So like in a sport, you can't eye gouge. In a sport, you can't grab testicles. In a sport, you can't eat an ear off. In sport, you can't spit in their eye socket while you got a good moment and then ram your chin into the eye socket, hopefully grinding it into mush. You can't start ripping hair. You can't grab their hair and pull their head back as you chop their throat down. So it's like, the tools I use in protection, anything can be done in protection. Like, you have permission to do anything to protect yourself, But the things, what separates sport is there are things you can't do in sport. So a lot of this nitty-gritty stuff you can't do in sport. And I'm not telling you guys that my whole form of fighting I recommend is spitting in people's eyes, ramming chins in their sockets, pulling their hair, clawing their eyes on, all this stuff. But I just say, if it happens, it does. That's what's required to protect me. That's what I do. Yeah, I'll grab some nuts. I'll rip them off. I don't care. But it's just like whatever you got to do. So to say there's one art that becomes dominant, first of all, most of these arts are mush. There's like in karate. In karate, you'd learn different punch kicks. You'd also learn different defenses. Like if a guy chokes you here, if a guy has you in a headlock here. But then we'd also do all the sport kata and sport drills and sport sparring, and we'd have katas. And so there's these meddled things where you're teaching me what I can and can't do when we fight. But when we're not fighting, some of these techniques are things that are legal in my fighting. So there's a lot of this gray area in a lot of these traditional martial arts. Well, we have fun sport fighting, but then we have what you would do to kill someone or defend yourself. But it's like, but they don't really have a way to really define them both, separate them, or explain it, or even train you right. Because you spend all your time training these tough techniques that would hurt someone. And then usually, not always, there are different academies, but then when you spar, it tended to be all your sparring was this point sparring, hands up, jump and tap ahead. It had nothing to even resemble all the training we spent a month training for the few days we sparred. And so there's a lot of muddy water. I call it muddy water. It's an old book by Basui, but he called it mud and water or mud water. And it's like there's a lot of muddy water to me. It's like they don't know how to separate their food. It's a buffet and everything's smushed together. And so, different martial arts succeed in the mush, but a lot of martial arts are sport-based, like boxing, sport. Most kickboxing sport, although Muay Thai is brutal, it's a sport. Though BJJ can be brutal, it's also a very gentle art. It's a sport. There is protection in based all these, but it's sport arts, So now we talk protection arts. Well, even in protection arts, there's a lot you can do because there's a lot of sport arts that have protection. But as a protection art, I think it starts coming more important eventually as time goes by, not trying to find a style, but to start understanding there are different systems of protection. Yeah. And I call them systems for different reasons. Like I would call Jeet Kune Do is not a martial art style; it is a system. But Jeet Kune Do is a system. Tony Blauer spear hand, that's a system. Richard Dimitri was under Blauer; he has his own shredder system, but he utilizes some of spear hands because he's his protege. Krav Maga is not, really they can call it a martial art all they want. It is Israeli, but it's just a hodgepodge of whatever the people who were in charge that did do martial arts that were in charge of that. Looked at what they had and then they added, and they looked around and they needed stuff they didn't have. They kind of Bruce Lee Jeet Kune Do'd it in a way, as far as we don't have this stuff. Who does this stuff? We're going to take the stuff we think we need from that art.
Yeah, so like gross motor movements, easy to learn.
Yeah, but true Krav Maga tends to focus less on technique and more on scenario training. And so when you start talking about the striking art, and if we need to know, are we talking what's best for sport or what's best for protection? That's why I brought that up in the first place, is that there's a dividing line. So with protection, systems and tactics are more important sometimes than actually a style martial art. Like go to police, they'll show you moves, but when they're going to run out a house or they're going to do a SWAT team, they have systems, they have tactics, and they have techniques that represent these systems and tactics to accomplish their goal. And protection should be very similar to that, but a lot of people don't. They'll teach you how to punch, kick, lock, throw, sweep, takedown, and now you just fight, and whatever happens, happens. And I'm like, well, not all those tools help me fight. Like when you talk about sport, you have commonalities. You have one, you get only one opponent. So when it comes to sport, if you only have one opponent, right there, that says we can do a lot more things and have a lot less to be worried about. You usually have a weight class, because if you are stuck with only allowing certain techniques to come out, and we can't just claw eyes, hit groin, bite, spit, whatever, well, then we have certain techniques utilized, so there'll be a superior way to win with these rules. So we have one opponent, and we have rules and techniques, which means a weight class is super important, because if you're stuck to the same technique and the same rules, and you're in a controlled environment, first of all, we're in a nice soft matted area with the referee to stop us anytime we say tap. But now weight class can become more important, because if we're stuck with the same moves, someone bigger and stronger could easily have a physical advantage. Now, BJJ does have in a lot of these sports, a smaller guy can still do well, and BJJ sometimes helps the smaller guy because it's all about getting the right underhook and control. A smaller guy can hide space better than a bigger guy, and a smaller guy can utilize space easier than a big guy with big fat stumps. So it can still kind of help the smaller guy, but it's also still, you're giving up a lot of weight. That's rough. A lot of lightweights don't do the unlimited after BJJ competitions. The absolute, they don't play the absolute a lot because it's just pointless. You're going to be fighting black belts, purple belts, 300-pound black belts. Yeah. It's just like, man, it ain't worth the wear and tear just after you won your competition to get that stupid absolute trophy. So, it's a lot. So when you have that, you have a controlled environment, one opponent, weight class, referee, rules established. You also know when you're going to fight. You also can rest and prepare and study on your opponent. Like people don't understand that's not fighting. That
Hands are wrapped.
Yeah, or whatever it is. Yeah. But it's a completely staged event. Like I'm not saying it's a hoax. These guys are tough fighters. I'm not slamming them. I'm just saying that when you go to this, you get time to prepare, time to study, time to know when. You got to regulate your diet, your sleep, everything, your drive, everything. Almost everything. I mean, you can still get knocked out. It's a fight. It's vicious. I'm not denoting that at all. I'm just saying all those factors are not involved in protection. So when that's not involved and you don't know when you're going to fight, you don't know who you're going to fight, you don't know where you're at, you don't know if there's a car that's going to run you over when you step back. You don't have to worry about your foot getting stuck in a sofa, tripping down a stairwell. You don't have to worry about your kid behind you. I can't just step back as he punches and bunches. I'm going to fall on my kid, fall on her. She'll get killed by me falling on her and this guy falling on me. And all these things never go through your ultimate fighting head because you never thought about having to defend your wife or defend your kid while a guy comes at you with a switchblade, and it's just like people don't care or think about it. They're either blind to it or they don't know about it. I think a lot of them, when they know about it, they stay blind because I don't know how to do it. And my instructor doesn't have these answers and we never covered that. You're just out of luck. And I'm like, well, you're right. You are out of a lot of luck if you've got your kid behind you and a big, strong guy is coming at you with a knife trying to shank you. But you need to have something. Otherwise, it's just good night. So as far as what system's the best striking, I would say no one really has a hold of it. I think the right Jeet Kune Do, again, the right Jeet Kune Do Academy can help you, not all of them. The right Krav Maga Academy can help you, not all of them. Now we start talking about maybe pedigree or the people who do it. Because you can go to Taekwondo Academy and it's all flowery kata, and then you can go to Taekwondo Academy and these guys
killers
kick the out of anyone, anywhere, anytime, and they're used to taking punches. So, it goes back to Bruce Lee saying it's not the technique, it's the guy performing it. It's not the system and style, it's the person utilizing the tools that are always more important. And that's another example how, because, I would say there are some systems that are definitely study that and work on that more and have a leg up, and some that are coming around more like Krav Maga and some of these other systems. But, it really, where you're going and who you're dealing with can be much more superior than what art you're learning, because you'll have a bunch of knuckleheads in Jeet Kune Do that read a Bruce Lee book, saw seminars, don't know what they're talking about, but they'll tell you they're doing JKD because they saw a dude twice, 3 years they saw this dude 3 times, and he gave him a certificate that says, Jeet Kune Do because you've watched my DVDs and you spent 2 weeks with me. And there's a lot of that going on there. Yeah. And there's a lot of that with a lot of systems. There's a lot of BJJ like that. There's a lot of BJJ guys that until Marcelo came here and until a black belt moved to your state, most of the black belts you have now are like this past 8 years, the black belt world has increased because a lot of these guys have been struggling for the past 10 or 15 years, finally made the black belt. There are so many more black belts in America right now than there ever were in BJJ. But still, we're talking 1,000 black belts? There's probably only 1,000 black belts, give or take, in America right now. So before Marcelo, we had blue belts teaching, purple belts teaching, brown belts teaching, and Marcelo would say only in America. He's like,
in an academy.
Yeah, he'd say, bro, only in America. He says there's a blue belt teach. He's like, bro, and the BJJ, you can't have any of this. And he also said that when you're a black belt, and this is what I loved about BJJ. When you're a black belt in BJJ, you don't get a teach yet. Now everywhere else in America, you hear you got a black belt. I gave you a black belt. You can go teach your own shop. But the thing is, your instructor led you to a black belt. He had to do whatever he had to do for you to get you there, but you have no idea what he did for you. You just got there, and you have no idea how to get someone else there. So in Brazil is the only art that I know of generally. I mean, there's others, but that I heard of that when you get a black belt, you have to still be under your black belt and teacher for a 3-year probation period as you learn to be an apprentice teacher. That way, as you're trying to figure it out and you're starting having problems, you can go to him. And he can help you understand how to be a better teacher. So there's actually a 3-year period after being a black belt where you're supposed to kind of be in this apprenticeship to teach. And he's like, only in America. He's like, in Brazil, you got to be a black belt for 3 years and train, to really, you got to be under your instructor. He's like, and that's where you get your first degree anyways. And he's like, because you have to have a degree of separation generally too. Like, you can't be a blue belt and promote a blue belt. You have to be 2 degrees above it. So like a brown belt can promote a blue belt, but a brown belt cannot promote a purple belt, theoretically. But you want to do it. You would want the head of your style to do it, or your black belt. You wouldn't want to be a brown belt promoting anyone. You can do that, but you shouldn't. I mean, you could. So you can't be a purple belt and promote a blue belt. You can't. You have to be a brown belt. And if you're a black belt, you can promote a purple belt, but you can't promote a brown belt.
Mm-hmm.
And so you to promote a black belt, you have to be a 2-stripe black belt to promote a black belt.
Yeah,
and so on and so forth. So there's got to be a degree of separation. And he's like, only in America the blue belts teaching. But the reason was there was not a lot of black belts here. And so a lot of these people that are, after seeing Hoist, saw these guys when they came around, or went to Brazil. There are a lot of original, I guess I'd call them pioneers, American pioneers. There are a lot of American pioneers that went to Brazil and spent a week or a month there and found their guys or found out what they needed and then came back. And then they would find that guy and bring him out once a year to learn from. So there was a lot of that going on 20-some years ago. And so these guys would have a blue belt. They're learning. They'd see the guy every year, but as a few years go by, he'd promote him. He'd give him a stripe every year or a couple stripes until he's like, you're at a purple belt level with my system or a brown or whatever. But he's like, only in America was this happening, you know. And it happened in a lot of other countries since then, but how else can it be? Unless Marcelo moved to your town or black belt moved to your town, you got to do what you do is learn. So there's a lot of that going on in America where a lot of these guys that were blue belts that started teaching and they grassrooted like me, like you, like others, and then eventually they got their black belts. So that's where the majority of these 1,000 black belts are these grandfathered original pioneers that either brought people out or went and saw and came back. And then there are some that are black belts moved here, but that's a lot less the case. Like Marcelo and other people, a lot more the case that it's guys that finally, like, it's not Rogan, who's he under? Bravo. Like, you know, he's a guy that did a lot of great training on a lot of people and did a lot of fights, a lot of competitions, but he went to Brazil. He's had Brazilians here. You know, that's how he got it. That's how we all had to do it. You know, I was in that path too until luckily Marcelo showed up in my neighborhood, so to speak, so that I could now get under him and train with him every day and ask him every question I could ever think of at every moment.
Yeah, they had to do it. Like there's like a thing in business, like you don't just wait to put out your best stuff. You like if Henry Ford was waiting for the Shelby Mustang, it never would have got there. Yeah. All right, we have this Model A, Model T, whatever. Yeah, it's pretty awesome for the time. Looking back, you don't want it. You want the new Mustang, but put out what you have, and then you build on that. So,
and my old phrase is, it's always better to have a 50% of something than 100% of nothing.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you also make whips. Like how did you what kind of whips are they? It sounds kind of funny at first, but
I'll tell you what I tell my wife. And if ever you want to do an intro of whips, we'll say this. I hear you make whips like Indiana Jones. And I always make sure they have the word
mentioned Indiana.
Indiana Jones, because if not, I immediately profile everyone, and I have to deal with the dirty joke reference, because when the world hears whips, they think of either, well, I guess they think of Django now, too, but it's like people think of 50 Shades of Grey, or Indiana Jones, or Django. I guess there's 3 categories now, you know. But it's like that's all you hear about. So
the Indiana Jones type.
Yeah. So I make kangaroo bull whips, leather kangaroo. There's a lot of types of whips, but when I'm not teaching martial arts in the evening, which I teach for Marcelo at his home academy, I teach the kids and junior adults. During the day, I make whips out of kangaroo. I just use a sharp blade and kangaroo skin. I make whips. What got me started in whips was actually teaching kids from Marcelo, crazy enough. Oh. So when I started teaching kids from Marcelo 12 years ago, I started thinking, what would I want to do? If I taught kids, what would I do? I'm like, let's have a Halloween party. You know, it's like, I don't know your academy. I mean, my other academies have learned to do this stuff. I'm like, I want a Halloween party. Let's get these kids in these outfits. Let's have fun. And so before I was about to have a Halloween party, my mother-in-law, or my father and mother-in-law, they're very kind, and they decided, I think my youngest daughter was, I want to say it was when she was 5. That had to have been about 10 years ago. So, yeah, she's 14. She has 4 or 5. They took us down to Florida, and they paid for us because it wasn't much to have us just be a part of it. So they paid for us to come down. They wanted us to join us. And in there, they had the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular show. If you guys never been to it, you need to see it. It's been there for 30 years. They have several indies a week do it. They've had a couple indies die through the years. I mean, it's a really rough spectacular. I mean, you fall off that 2-story building. I mean, you know, it's not like there's harnesses. They're literally, their job is to do the same stunt with swords and whips and jumping off ledges. It's, you know, it's like life or death parkour for fun, you know. And so they have this really cool spectacular. When I was a kid, my parents never took me anywhere or did anything, you know. So we went to Disney World once, and I saw that show. And my dad's a hard-working farmer, and we never had any luxuries to an extent. He just never really, we weren't luxurious. We just got by on whatever, you know, very basic stuff. Even though he could afford it, it was a minimal understanding of life. So when we went there, I said, Dad, can I have a hat? He said no. So when I went back, of course he'd say, no, I'm going to spend $40. It's probably 25. Now it's 40 or 60, you know, 20 years later. Yeah. But there's no way he's spending $20 for me to have a little Indiana Jones hat, you know. So when I went back with my family, I was like, look, kids, I'm just going to say this right now. I'm not going to say a word to you. You can pick out any souvenir you want because I'm buying that hat, and I'm not going to say a word to you on any preference because I am walking back the Indiana Jones hat. So I came back with a hat, and you know, it's just a cheap one that says Indiana Jones. You can probably find it for $20 on eBay, but I probably spent $40 at Disney. You know, so I had the hat, and I'm like, I got a leather coat already, and I'm like, you know what? I'll just dress up as Indiana Jones for my Halloween martial art party, and so. In doing that, I started getting on YouTube, and I found a guy named Adam Winrich. So if you guys want to see some whip cracking, type Adam and then Winrich, like he wins and he's rich. And he has a great series. I have my own Facebook page if you want to see, YouTube channel, which Blake Bruning, which has a lot of whip cracking too. But check him out. But he had this video, and I watched how to crack whip, and I started thinking, that looks. I'm like, if I'm going to dress up Indiana Jones, I need to know how to crack a whip. I mean, if I'm just going to sit here with these kids and just be goofy and throw games and candy, I'm like, I at least need to go crack a whip once. So I watched the video. I thought I can do that. I contacted Adam. He told me where to get a whip. I got a whip. And it wasn't until 6 years later, after me having a lot of experience in the whip world, and when I first started, I was led to a guy named Joe Strain. Joe Strain is a whip maker who made whips for Lone Ranger, Indy 4, Iron Man 2, what's his name? Anthony Hopkins from Zorro when he snuffed out the candles. That was Joe Strain's whip that he was snuffing candles out, things like that. And so I love Joe's work. And then when I found out Joe was retiring 4 or 5 years ago, I realized if I can't, because just like martial arts, every artist is different. Every teacher has trained something to a certain extent with certain people that the other guy didn't. So everybody has their own flavor. Well, whips are the same. We're all making a craft, but our own creative understanding and energy comes out in our craft, just like in martial arts. Even though you're building an item, every part of you comes out in that item, just like if you painted a picture. So every whip has its own feel based on the guy who made it, just based on his understanding, his technique, the way he cuts things, how good he is, how good he's not. So I fell in love with Joe Strain, and when I found out he was retiring, I just felt one thing. To me, when people ask about whips, they're like, "Why do you like Joe Strain?" I say, "Well, first of all, you ever watch Kill Bill?" Yeah. Like, the line where it says, what's the difference between a Hattori Hanzo sword? I think that's how they named him. He said, but if you want to talk about Hattori Hanzo, first you got to realize that every other sword was not made by him. Now we can have this conversation. So I would say the same thing about Joe Strain. I'm like, before I can talk about Joe Strain whips, you need to know one thing. Every other whip was not made by him. And so when I found out he was retiring, I'm like, what am I going to do if I can't get a Joe Strain whip? And so I started trying to figure out how to make the craft myself, because I'm like, if I can't buy one from him when I want to whip, no one's near it. So I started to understand how to make whips, and I spent time with him, and I've talked to him, and I'm going to visit him again this year to understand how he does it, because it was really not for me to want to make a career making whips, but for me to make the whips I want, I had to get good enough to do that, in which case now we're 4 years deep making whips, 500 whips later. I'm still not where I want to be, but I'm really good and really close.
It's really interesting. Thinks that it breaks the sound barrier, right?
Yes, yeah. Well, you can break the sound barrier with a towel. You can break the sound barrier, like anytime you hear a pop, that breaks the sound barrier. Like a gun, the reason it bangs is because when the bullet shoots, it breaks 786 miles an hour. And once you hit the sound barrier, it makes the pop. And what that pop is, from what I always understood, is like lightning. What's thunder? Lightning is when the lightning cuts through the air, it separates the air molecules. And so they get separated when they come back together. So when you crack a whip or anything breaks the sound barrier of a gun, what it does is it slices through the air so fast that it separates the air enough that the air has to come back, because all we are is surrounded by air. So that pop, from my understanding, is something slicing so fast at that one moment that it cut the air enough to make the air separate and have to slap back together. That's my understanding. I could be wrong, but that's the way I always understood it. So when you do that with a towel where you flick it back and flick it forward and pull it back, you'll get the whip. But it's not the same thing as a true whip where I send it forward and it cracks where I want and it tears the target and it does things right. Yeah. A lot more damage than a little towel flick. But it's the same concept, is it breaks the sound barrier. And so the very end of the whip, when it finally rolls out, because as you cast a whip, you know what you do. It looks like there's a big circle that gets smaller and smaller and smaller as it falls away until finally it pops. And what that pop is the very end of the whip. As it gets smaller and smaller, the circle makes it travel faster and faster and faster till the final end flicks the tip off, and that tip will go over 786 miles an hour on that final flick out, and that's what breaks the sound barrier.
Yeah. So what happens if you do that, like literally to somebody's, like if you just do it to my chest?
How bad can a whip damage you?
Yeah, I mean, it would.
Well, a whip can cut. A lot of people do these whip tricks where they'll put like a soda can and they'll shake it and they'll cut it in half with a whip.
Oh, wow.
But what does that is kind of not really a trick, but it is. What they do is they get the can shook up so there's pressure. But they actually take, when you have a whip, you have a leather whip, but then you usually have a lash, which is called a fall, but people call it a lash. And then you have a thing called a little cracker or a popper. The cracker or the popper goes crack. It goes pop. That's what they call it, a cracker or a popper, all right? So this popper is a little piece of thread that's twisted in the right way, and then that's usually what does the cracking sound, and then that's usually what you'd want to hit. Like, say if you want to snuff a candle out, you want to hit it with that threaded popper, not the leather lash or the whip, because the leather lash or whip would beat it, while the cracker would just snuff it without knocking a candle over. So that cracker, usually what they do when they want to cut cans is they make it a little longer and they tie little knots every half inch away. So now when that thing's coming around like 180, it's not quite barbed wire, but it's like that effect, having these little knots that when it hits and rips, these little tiny knots in that cracker will just cut through you in a way that it wouldn't if it was just strained. So when they do stuff like cut cans in half, they actually put little knots in a cracker. But still, the same thing could cut you even without the knots, but with the knots, it would cut you like the can. So you can get sliced with it, but it can't really break bone unless it was like your finger was held out. Like if I had my hands and fists and my thumbs in, like you don't want to get hit in the face with a whip or whatever. Mm-hmm. I mean, it could still cut you here and there, but you wouldn't break a bone with the whip part that cracks. Now, I do have the back end of the whip, which is a nail spike with some lead, and I could, it's like, it's a weapon that could easily break your face, but the whip itself wouldn't probably break a bone except maybe a finger. Like if the finger was out or loose, I could probably break your finger when I cracked it. So it's not really a bone slicing thing. It can break bone, but the odds of that, unless, like I said, you're in that situation, it won't. That's why usually when you hold targets, you learn to make a fist, and it'll sting and it'll hurt and you can get cut if you're done wrong, but you're not going to worry about breaking a bone unless I did something stupid like I had a target with my two fingers sticking out where if I was wrong, the fall mother would hit it and cracked it or whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But whips, and I'll just say this, whips were not meant to beat people. All right, whips were not meant to beat slaves. Why I said Django is because there's a lot of misconception that whips were made for slaves. Whips were never made for slaves. Whips are not even supposed to be to beat animals. See, what people don't understand is that when a cattle rancher has a whip, he's not there to whip the horse, or a coachman. They're not here to whip the horse. The coachman cracks the whip over the horse's head when they're running on the old Western coaches, because that pop drives them to get scared and run faster. It's not to beat an animal. So now you're on horseback and you have a whip and you have a big herd of cows, and now you're chasing a cow that left the herd. You have to catch up to it, get to its side to flank it to go left. Like you got to go to the right to flank it left. But with a whip, I can reach out and crack and scare it on the right side, making it turn left. So whip was used more for a directional device, not something to beat an animal, because when you beat animals, everyone knows what happens to animals. Yeah, they either get really destroyed and suck up like into nothing, where they're terrible with their spirit, or they turn angry and violent, just like anything beats. So people were not meant to be beat by whips. But like a gun, is a gun evil? No. Is a knife evil? No. All that is rock. If I put a gun in the middle of this room and left it for 100 years and no one touched it, would that gun have killed anyone?
Likely not.
Would that gun have helped anyone?
Probably not.
It'd be better if I just sold it and used the money to buy food, right? Sitting there does nothing. So all these physical items, a whip, a gun, a knife, they're just tools, like a hammer, a screwdriver. Like, if people like a knife kills people, I'm like, no. The knife doesn't kill a person. The person holding the knife kills someone. If I had a knife, like, if a knife isn't evil, a knife is rock. Earth is not evil. Earth is rock. How we use the earth is what is evil or good. If I made a knife out of earth and I was a good guy, a surgeon could take that knife and save lives. A guy who wants to rob you could cut your throat. So it's not the gun, it's not the knife, it's not the whip. Same thing with whips. Whips were not made to beat people. Did people use them, or animals? They weren't made for people. They're made to just scare animals and to hurt them better. But people started beating animals with them. Slaves, they started using them for slaves. Anyone that probably did use a whip for a slave, they probably were beating their slave with it. But again, that is not what whips are for. I don't condone that. And that we really only in the past 10 years has there been a huge thing where when people on college campuses start to see these kids that are making whips and cracking them, every now and again you get a protest where a lady of color gets upset and says, "You're offending me because it's like you're celebrating white supremacy because you have a whip, or that you're making me feel bad about my slave heritage, which no one's been a slave in this country as far as legal slave for 100 years, but they don't understand. No, he's just cracking it for fun. He's doing a sport. It's like I'd say the best way to explain real whip cracking and the competitions in Australia and here is like rhythmic gymnastics. You ever seen rhythmic gymnastics where they have the twirling thing or the ball and they do all these great moves with it? That's what whip cracking is really today. It's a sport. It's an event. There's all sorts of cool combinations and patterns and things you got to learn that are hard to master. But it's not meant to attack a person, hit person whatsoever. You can learn to use a whip. You can learn to defend yourself with a whip. But again, the whip is not meant to hurt or hit or cut or bash someone. And then like Jesus Christ, they talked about when he got hit with the cat of nine tails, what they don't realize when he got beat, what they had, instead of a little lash and thread, is they had little hooks. So that's what they used to do. So when they would hit him, a little fish hook gouged into his ribs, and when they pulled it out, it just ripped chunks of flesh away. And so like you could easily do something to make a whip worse like that. But again, that isn't what they were meant for. People have used a lot of things. Like the number one stabbing weapon in America, you know what it is?
Probably like a pick or something.
Screwdriver. It's not a knife. You stab out of passion. People get so mad and passionately crazy. They stab someone. Like it's not a sane person at the moment that decides, you know what, I'm bored. I'm just going to stab this guy over here. So when your emotions are up and you're high, and you're not saying this is normal or anyone should stab anyone, but when they do, they grab the nearest item they can to stab someone, and there's a screwdriver in your kitchen drawer, there's a screwdriver in your glove box, there's a screwdriver in your garage, there's a screwdriver used at the end of your keychain, like there's just screwdrivers everywhere, and usually that's the number one assaulted weapon for stabbing in America, just because of access and availability when you lose your mind.
Yeah, I would actually have a hammer and a screwdriver instead of a knife or a gun. Because if I get pulled over or something, I'm not a big fan of guns. I don't have anything against them, but I don't own one.
You're going to take a lot more heat.
Yeah, I would have like a hammer and a screwdriver, get pulled over. It's not a knife. I'm not worried about. It's not a knife. But if there's some. Yeah,
you keep a box cutter lying around. It's where you just keep a box cutter, a screwdriver.
If somebody attacks me or something, I got my knife or my. I can call it a knife. Screwdriver right there, or my hammer right there, and
or like Fast and Furious 2 guy had just this giant wrench, like a big car wrench, like a 24 gauge millimeter. It's like that thing's a little metal rod, I'd break someone's face.
I saw somebody. I don't know if he was like in Mexico or something, but he was like cracking whips, and he was relating to the motion of the cracking the whip to his punching style. He was a martial arts instructor. Do you see the relation to that? Like the way you crack a whip is the way you...
Surprising. I may be wrong about this. So you Western history whip enthusiasts, you may be able to correct me. But the American cowboy was not American. It was Filipino. We got our ideas for cowboys based on the Filipino cowboy. Filipino Kali is a conceptual martial art that involves weapons. They have whip styles. So not everyone that does Kali does whip. But there are a lot of different branches of Kali, and we'd have to go into Kali to explain it. But one of them is whip. So a lot of times when you see whip fighting, it's usually a 4-foot, which is a really short whip.
I think he was a Filipino guy that I saw, actually, now that you mentioned that.
He is probably a 4-foot whip, because of the 4-foot whip with a 2-foot fall, it's still 6 feet. That's still long range for weapons. So a lot of these Filipino guys would use these short whips, and they call it a fighting whip, because that's more like what they would use. Like, because a 10-foot whip means I need a 20-foot radius, and to do that indoors, it's not going to be a very functional weapon. It's like if I was in the middle of a crowded mall and I had a staff in my hand and I'm elbow to elbow with people, I cannot swing that staff. I need to let that go. So a whip would be the same thing. So a lot of these guys that do whips and do fighting, it came from the Filipino martial arts, which oddly enough is not where I learned to whip crack, which you think it would being a Kali instructor. I'd watched Dan do some videos on it. I've heard about it. I've talked about it, but none of the Filipino guys I trained actually used whips. And then as I got into whip cracking later, I started, my martial art training through Kali made me master whips really easy, like compared to the average person, but still I found out later that it's like, the fighting whips were more Filipino. So a lot of times if you guys did YouTube fighting whip or whatever, you'll see some guys that are just learning it or don't know what they're doing. But usually if you see a guy that looks pretty slick, he's probably Filipino, or he's me.
Yeah. So you think, is that motion the same? Can you use that as a punch?
Filipino is a conceptual art. So like what they would do is they teach you how to do what we call an angle 1, which would be like if you went to draw an X on a piece of paper, that angle 1 would be your first slash on an X. So whether I came down with a stick or a knife, or let's just say I'm swinging, it'd be like a hammer fist, a horizontal hammer fist, right? So Anything that did that motion would be the same. So to them, whether they hammer fist you, they ice pick stabbed you, they forward pick sliced you, they had a stick or a knife or a sword or a shield, they would just hammer you at that diagonal across your neck and face, and they would call that whole thing an angle one. So whether they had a whip or not, or if they had nothing in their hand, being a conceptual art, instead of changing their art and now they box you or now they clinch you and Muay Thai you, they would just, instead of having a stick or a knife to ice pick you, well, if they didn't have that knife, they would just hammer fist you in the face instead. So to them, motion was motion, technique was just technique. Depending on what I had or not had in my hand would just change whether I had to be, it was more of a looping, more of a stabbing, more of a slicing, more of a bashing, more of a whatever it was. So in a sense, he probably was accurate saying that would benefit him. But has that guy ever gotten in a real whip fight? I doubt it. Has a guy ever gotten in a real whip fight to save his life? I freaking doubt it. Has a guy probably even gotten too many fights in his life where he hammer fist someone and had his style work perfectly? Again, I doubt it. I'm sure he has gotten some fights, but most people don't get in a lot of protection fights unless you're bouncing or doing an occupation where you have to defend yourself. Then you got to injure degree. So a lot of these people that have all these theories and these conceptual arts, they are good to have. It's good to understand. There's a lot you can learn from it. But, you know, most of these people that are conceptual, they just have their way. They don't change. Like, here's where I go into Wing Chun. Here's where I go into Muay Thai. Here's where I'm going to go to BJJ. Here's where I'm going to go more to a mixed martial arts style. Or here's where I'm going to pull back. You know, there's like a lot that doesn't happen with a lot of people. So these Kali guys can usually say, because I could do Kali, I do everything. Because in Kali, we have every weapon. We have clinching, we have groundwork, we have an art of biting, you know. So it's like, so in theory you do it all. Well, it's like, it's true, you do a Kali, how Kali does it all, but still, it's still one thought trying to do it all. It's not a lot of different thoughts, you know. And so, you know, that's another thing where people that are well trained in versatile martial arts, they're still limited by that one versatile martial art, because not every, like Bruce Lee said, not every art has mastered it. Not every art has everything. Every art has a specialized understanding and goal and range and techniques and tools that they choose to do to win their fights. But again, not everyone does everything. So there are certain arts where that art is more preferred, or that art would do better. But to say one art could ever help you with anything altogether, it's like saying, I will live forever on peanut butter. I will never need any other food. Or like, I only need Coke. Coke is a drink. Coke will make me live forever. I will never need water again. You know, it's like, well, Coke's great when you want a Coke. There's a time and place. That McDonald's Coke, man, that sugar they put in there, you're just like, I could use a Coke right now. And maybe you don't. Maybe you don't drink Coke. That's great. The other time it's like, I need water. So it's just, you know, there is no one thing to dominate that. And I think that's where there's also a lot of problem with most people. Most people think one art's enough, or I just need one art. Or, well, you need to figure out what that art is for you, and that's fine. You want one art, that's great. But every art has its limitations, and part of that kennel blind is where they don't recognize their limitations, and they don't want to go beyond those limitations. Or they like, it'd almost be better for a guy to recognize limitations and then say, but I'm not going to do it, than for a guy that would never recognize it and ignore it. I'd rather you say, I see it, but I don't care. I'd have more respect for that guy than the guy that recognizes it but never does anything about it. At least he'd dismiss it.
Yeah. You know? Yeah, makes sense. Gotta keep open-minded all the time. As we can start to wrap it up here, we're going on almost 90 minutes. That was fast. So if somebody wants to get a hold of you for to look into your whips, where do they go?
Thanks for the plug. We'd go to my identity. Like I'm a huge fan of Jesus Christ. I'm not trying to offend anyone or whatever. I know sometimes you say things we're upset, but I'm just a huge fan of Jesus, and whatever that entails, I'm just a huge fan of Jesus. So finding my own identity into the whip company, I was looking for it, and I chose my title to be Trinity Whip Company. And the Trinity meant a lot more than just Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. There's a lot more why I chose the word Trinity. Like, I only make 3 types of whips mainly, which is bullwhip, stock whip, snake. That's another Trinity. There are other whips, but those are what I call the Trinity of whips. There's a lot of reasons why I chose Trinity, but my identity for whip making is Trinity Whip Company. So you can go to TrinityWhipCo.com. So Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, Whip, WHIP, Co, CO for company at .com and find my work.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for being on. And if somebody wants to get a hold of me for training, whether locally or remote, you can go to Hadley Fitness, Ryan at HadleyFitness.com, rather. It's Ryan, RYAN, at HADLEY, fitness.com. and I'll do online training for Skype, whether it's kettlebell training, body weight, all kinds of fitness training, and also in person if you're in the Indianapolis area.
Thanks for having me on, Ryan. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And if you want to get a hold of me for the show, you can go to fitnessandconsciousness@gmail.com.